Denis Villeneuve's approach to visualizing prescience in Dune Part 3 would almost certainly evolve beyond the dream logic of the first two films. By the time we reach the events of Dune Messiah in Part 3, Paul Atreides is no longer a young man glimpsing fragments of possibility. He's a ruler drowning beneath the weight of infinite futures. Paul is deeply conflicted as outwardly he appears as the godlike Muad'Dib, a figure of worship and fear, but inwardly he is a man exhausted by the crushing weight of prophecy, expectation, and bloodshed. I've talked about how there's the potential for an emotionally raw and powerful performance from Chalamet through all of this, but something I haven't talked about as much is how Denis might evolve his vision scenes and use them in an impactful way come the events of Dune Part 3. So in this video, I'm going to be discussing how Denis Villeneuve might go about adapting Paul Atreides' vision scenes for the upcoming film. There will be spoilers from the Dune Messiah book, so I would recommend not watching this video if you haven't fully read Frank Herbert's novel yet. Before I get into it though, if you want to keep up to date on any of my content surrounding Dune Part 3 and beyond, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating and subscribing to the channel. But without further ado, let's dive into Paul's visions from Dune Part 3. So by the time we reach the Dune Messiah book, Paul Atreides' prescience has evolved into something far more oppressive and tragic than the dreamlike glimpses he experienced in Dune. In the first book, his visions were fragmented warnings, symbolic, sometimes contradictory, and often open to interpretation. But in Messiah, Paul is no longer a young man discovering destiny as he becomes an emperor imprisoned by it. His visions now function like a suffocating lattice of inevitabilities. Instead of seeing one possible future, he sees countless branching timelines, each one a variation of the same grim truth. The jihad carried out in his name has already reshaped the galaxy, and billions have died because of the myth built around him. Paul's prescience no longer offers escape routes, and it shows him the consequences of every choice, and every one of those choices leads to suffering. One of the most striking aspects of Paul's visions in Messiah is how they blur the line between foresight and fatalism. He doesn't simply see what might happen, but what must happen for the Fremen to survive in the long term. This is where the concept of the golden path begins to take shape. Paul glimpses a future in which humanity stagnates, becomes predictable, and ultimately becomes vulnerable to extinction. His visions reveal that only through a brutal, almost unthinkable sequence of events can humanity be forced into a state of long-term survival. But the tragedy is that Paul himself cannot walk that path. He sees it, he understands it, but he knows it will require a different kind of being, someone who can embrace the monstrous transformation that he cannot. This knowledge haunts him, and his visions become a constant reminder of his own limitations. On top of this, in Messiah, his prescience becomes deeply personal. He foresees Chani's death long before it happens, and this knowledge poisons every moment they share. His visions show him two futures, one where he clings to Chani and loses the future for everyone else, and another where he allows the political marriage to Princess Irulan to produce heirs who will eventually walk the golden path. Paul sees his children before they exist, sees the tragedy of their births, and sees the pain Chani will endure. So his visions don't empower him as they torment him with the knowledge that he cannot save the person he loves most without dooming the species he is sworn to protect. Moving on, the conspiracies forming around Paul are another area where prescience becomes a curse rather than a gift. He senses the Bene Gesserit, the Tleilaxu, and the Spacing Guild weaving a plot against him, but his visions are also clouded by the presence of the Guild navigator Edric, whose prescient abilities interfere with Paul's own. This creates a rare moment of uncertainty for him as he sees the outlines of danger, the shadows of betrayal, but not precise details. It's like watching a storm form on the horizon, but being unable to tell where the lightning will strike. This uncertainty takes it out on him, and it reinforces the idea that prescience is not omniscience. So even the most powerful seer in the universe can be blinded. Coming to one of the main examples of Paul's prescience in Messiah, the Stoneburner attack is probably one of the most devastating examples of one. In the instant before the weapon detonates, Paul sees multiple futures unfold simultaneously, one where he steps into the blast and dies, and another where he steps away and survives but loses his sight. The path that forms is one that preserves the future even though he is condemned to blindness. This moment encapsulates the core tragedy of Paul's visions in that he is constantly forced to choose the path of the greatest suffering because it is the only one that leads to humanity's survival. His prescience doesn't save him as it demands sacrifice from him at every turn. And by the time we reach the end of Messiah, Paul's visions have become a burden too heavy to bear. He sees his own end, walking into the desert and embracing the Fremen tradition of leaving the blind to die. It is yet another step in the chain of inevitabilities he has foreseen. Paul doesn't walk into the desert because he is defeated, he walks into the desert because he has seen that his disappearance is necessary for the future to unfold as it must. His prescience has shown him that his myth must outlive him, and that his physical presence has become an obstacle to the destiny he has seen. In this way, Paul's visions in Messiah are a tragic burden and a constant reminder that he is both the architect and the prisoner of everyone's future. So in talking about Paul's prescience in the Dune Messiah book, this now brings me to how director Denis Villeneuve might choose to adapt and visualize this in the upcoming film. If Denis adapts Dune Messiah with the same poetic precision he brought to the first two films, I think Paul's prescience will likely become one of the defining visual and emotional elements of Dune Part 3. Villeneuve has already established a visual language for Paul's visions, being dreamlike, symbolic, and often fragmented, but Messiah's story demands something more fractured, more oppressive, and more psychologically intimate. Paul is no longer glimpsing the future coming in the second book, as he is drowning in it. So visually, I think Villeneuve might translate this by shifting from the warm golden dreamscapes of Part 1 to something colder, harsher, and even more abstract. Furthermore, instead of seeing a potential outcome as we did in Paul's visions previously, I think in Part 3 we might see multiple outcomes of the same moment played out within single vision scenes. Maybe the different cuts in a scene transition between these, representing the futures Paul could choose, but he doesn't. It would make the intimate moments with him and the weight that he feels even more prominent. Denis could also go a different route in achieving something like this, and maybe we see his prescience play out in front of him within the same frame. For instance, in adapting Paul's awareness of the conspiracy forming around him, on top of the scenes we do get separately with the conspirators, maybe we see something like Paul sitting alone in the Imperial Keep, and these figures involved in the conspiracy appear around him. Maybe the whole Edric issue plays a part in disrupting the clarity of a vision like this, and it's communicated to us that it isn't as straightforward in visualizing and predicting what happens next. Something like this could really get into the head of Paul a bit further and work in linking his prescient visions to decisions he makes in real space and time. This could also visually communicate the idea that Paul is not seeing a single plot, he is seeing every possible variation of the plot simultaneously. It essentially all becomes an overload for him. Furthermore, the Stoneburner attack later on in the story could act as another prime example of evolving his prescience, one that is built up to through the possibilities of doom it presents. Paul could see the two outcomes unfold at once, one where he dies instantly and one where he survives but loses his sight. And to display the importance of this moment, Villeneuve could intercut these futures within the scene itself. But from this point on in the story, the route that I think he's going to go in is play the shocking events of the Stoneburner out in real time. I think this is better when it comes to visualizing that attack cinematically on screen, and I think when it comes to this specific element, Villeneuve will choose to show visions that support it in the many scenes leading up to it. It's important to note that Paul does sense the danger of the Stoneburner before it detonates, but doesn't know everything until that moment happens. He knows that something catastrophic is closing in on him, something tied to the conspirators' growing desperation. But his visions don't give him all the details of this. Ultimately, I think the visions leading up to the Stoneburner will feel closer to the ones we got in part 1, where he knows something will happen, something bad, and that what happens will define the path he goes down. So at the start of Messiah, we might see his prescience play out in real time within the spaces he's situated in. As things become more and more clouded, I think those visions will become more distant, almost visualized in a similar way to what we saw with the Jamis fight in part 1. And then following the Stoneburner, I think this is where we'll get something quite bold from Villeneuve. In the book, Paul losing his physical sight doesn't blind him at all, as it forces him to rely entirely on prescience, and what he sees through that inner vision is far more overwhelming. He realizes immediately that the attack has pushed him deeper into the narrow corridor of futures he's been trying to avoid. The possibilities around him collapse, and the golden path, the harsh, necessary future that ensures humanity's survival, stands out. Now, many would think that Denis Villeneuve is going to treat Paul's post-Stoneburner sight as one of the most visually ambitious moments in the entire trilogy. He's been building toward this since part 1, and we'd think that in using symbolic imagery, he could deliver something that could be haunting and unforgettable. Yes, he could take that route, and there's the possibility that he will, but one thing I've always loved about Denis' films is his sense of minimalism. Minimalism in cinema is the art of stripping away everything unnecessary so that what remains hits harder. It isn't about doing less, it's about removing the noise so the meaning becomes louder. Denis typically trusts the audience to absorb emotion through atmosphere and not through too much explanation or visualization. So when it comes to Paul's prescience after the Stoneburner attack, I think Villeneuve is actually going to take the route of there being no visualization. I think we learn of Paul's state through his actions and what happens by the end of the film. Essentially, we don't see any visualization of what he sees through prescience, and instead, we watch the end of his path play out from our perspective. Paul's prescience often distances him from the audience as he becomes almost mythic and untouchable. Removing his prescience on screen would emphasize his vulnerability, his fear, and his isolation. It would remind the audience that beneath all the prophecy is a man that has just lost his sight and is trying to hold himself together through all the inevitability he's facing. If the audience doesn't see what Paul sees come the end, then his decisions, especially the walk into the desert, become more devastating from a cinematic point of view. We'd still know that this is the golden path, that Paul is leading in that direction, and that Villeneuve would communicate that to us leading into the final act. But when we do get there, we wouldn't have Paul's prescience or any more visions because the path is clear, haunting, and inevitable. So I think on screen that this will be the case as well. You don't get to see what Paul sees, as you only get to feel what he feels. I think it would be a powerful shift that turns Paul's prescience from a visual projection into a psychological burden. It makes the moment quieter, sadder, and more intimate, and it transforms Paul from a prophet we observe into a tragic figure we empathize with. But that was my video discussing how Denis Villeneuve could adapt Paul Atreides' visions in Dune Part 3. We'll have to see how the director approaches his final Dune film, but in thinking about some of the iconic moments, characters, plot points, and also visual elements, I think he can make a meaningful conclusion to his adaptation of Dune. It'll definitely be a hard task, but like with Part 1 and Part 2, he proved that it can be done, adapting a novel that was once known as being unfilmable into a sci-fi classic. But let me know down below in the comments section what you are personally excited for surrounding Dune Part 3, alongside how you think the director will go about adapting the character of Paul Atreides and also his vision scenes. For much more videos and news on Denis Villeneuve's Dune universe, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.